Hi, welcome to Quid Prose Quo. I'm Rin,
And I'm Zach.
and today we are talking about character agency and why it's important. Zach, what is agency?
That is an excellent question. When we're talking about agency in the context of characters in books, we are talking about the tendency to take action and even more than that, the tendency to take informed action. So there's a motivation behind why something is doing the verb, right?
Yeah.
So you need both the motivation, you need the proactivity, and then at the end, you also need a consequence. Because if there's no consequence, then they may as well not have even acted in the first place.
Yeah, I think the consequence is like a really important part that a lot of people forget about because people have their characters like do stuff and then like there's no consequences to what they do and everything just always goes their way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's really important for characters to have agency because agents are more interesting than objects, where an object is the opposite of an agent, where agents act and objects are acted upon. And
Mm-hmm.
we'd just rather read about people who do something rather than people who are simply acted upon. In most cases, we'll go into some non-examples at the end.
So why is it, Rin, tell us why it's important for characters to like we know that they're more interesting to read about when the characters have agency, but are there any other like impacts to the story besides like, oh, we like it better?
Yeah, so it helps immersion into the story. That's immersion, not immersion as emerging. And
Right.
it produces a tighter narrative and helps a lot with pacing. Zach has a really
Mm.
good example of this, and we talked about this on the podcast before.
Yeah, like when I was thinking about the idea of character agency, I was thinking about the film version of The Princess Bride, where every like every scene it is very clear what everybody wants, and it's very clear what the consequences of their actions are, and that helps set the scene for them to take another set of interesting actions. Like there isn't a whole ton that's happening um outside of the agency of the characters once you get the ball rolling. Like you set up all the pieces where it's like, okay, you have Princess Buttercup and you have Wesley captured by the Dread Pirate Roberts, and then you roll out from there. And from there, it's all just the chain of decision, consequence.
Yeah, and I think another way this applies in like creative endeavors is in like TTRPGs, which we have an episode coming up on soon, where it's way more interesting to play a tabletop role-playing game where the characters are taking actions and then there are consequences to those actions.
Hmm.
So that really helps drive like a D&D campaign, for example. Like, whereas if they don't do anything, then the campaign's boring and you're probably not going to keep playing.
Yep,
Um,
yep. Just as a side note, I have to share this little anecdote about possibly the one and only time that I've seen somebody lose a tabletop role-playing game.
how do you
Um,
lose a tabletop role-playing game?
well, this guy found a way. I was GMing just like a really casual like adventure setup, and one of the characters ended up getting captured by like the townspeople because they used magic and magic was forbidden or whatever. I don't remember the entire setup, but what happened is that the townspeople decided that they were going to kill the PC because they were a witch, right?
Oh no.
Um, and so, I tell the PC, okay, you're inside of this prison cell. What are you going to do next? And he says, well, I guess I'm just going to wait. And I was like, are you kidding me? You're going to wait. Okay, your character dies. Anyway, you lose. Moving on.
That's so funny. And that's like a great example of how that like just ended the narrative. Like it put like a hard stop to the story, at least to
Hmm.
his story. And like that's unless you're going for a tragedy with a hard stop, that's not a good example of like that's a good example of what not to do.
Right. And it would be way more like, and even in the case where you're trying to cut a story short, you want the story to be cut short by other people's decisions. So you can have your main character making decisions, but you can also have your antagonist making decisions along the way. And if the antagonist decision if the antagonist's decisions cut short the story of your main character, then that's a more compelling tragedy than if it's just like, oh, the fates cut the thread of the story right here, and that's where it shall end.
Yeah, it's like that person in your role-playing game just gave up. Like,
Hmm.
that's not interesting, that's not compelling. And we're all about telling
Hmm.
compelling stories here at Quid Pros Quo, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
well, let's look at a sliding scale of agency though, because like it's rarely black and white and it's like never a binary and like it depends, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I recently reread the Beyonder series by Brandon Mull, which makes me think of his books in general. And we're gonna do this with a grain of salt because I haven't read Fablehaven, which is like his main best-known series in years. Brandon Mull's female characters are less of an agent than his male characters. And like a
Hmm.
lot of male authors do the same thing, so this is not like specifically it is specifically calling out Brandon Mull, but it's not just he's not the only person who does this. This is not meant to be like defamation or anything. This is just an observation and an analysis. I will say Beyonders has Mull's best female character in my opinion. Rachel, I think, is his best character because she's more of an agent than the others. But if
Yeah.
we go into like Kendra and Brandon Mull's Fablehaven, she's pretty passive. Like Kendra is like the older sister, and her little brother Seth tells her to drink like this milk, which they've been told not to drink, and that lets them like see the magical creatures. And Kendra often stays closer to home than Seth. Like Seth will always be going out on these like giant adventures, and Kendra
Hmm.
just kind of stays home or really close to home and doesn't do as much. Like she's not always passive, but she is passive way more than Seth is because Seth is always like going out and making stuff happen. Like Seth is a driving force in the story. Kendra's is more reactive. Speaking of another Brandon Sanderson has three character aspects that he talks about in his writing courses, which you can find on YouTube. Um,
Hmm.
Likability, proactivity, and confidence. Where proactivity is like agency, character agency, and
Hmm.
Sanderson says you need 2/3, or like you need characters to be strong in 2/3 of those categories, or have significant growth across one of them, like to make a compelling character.
Right.
Um, so I using that, Kendra is very likable from Fablehaven, but she's not confident or proactive.
Hmm.
Whereas Seth, on the other hand, is all three. He's confident, likable, and proactive.
Hmm.
Competence and confidence that switch. So he's very confident, but he's not very competent. Like he's pretty bad.
Right.
He's like a teenage boy. Um, but that's another aspect of character creation that we can get into it maybe in the episode on how to create compelling characters.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that I mean, you talked about sliding scales, and you can have sliding scales for, each of those dials, where you can have somebody who's super proactive, mildly proactive, reactive, or passive, right? Um, Same thing going on with confidence and likability. When you were talking about like where Kendra ranks on this scale, I was thinking about the most recent book that I finished, which is called Blackwing by Ed McDonald. Wasn't really my vibe. I just am not I just don't like grimdark, and I probably could have. I don't know. I honestly don't know why I bought the book in the first place. It was probably on sale and it piqued my interest enough for me to buy it. So I read it and I got to the end of it and it was like, I mean, it's okay, but I don't think I was the target audience. And I think the main reason for that is because the viewpoint character was extremely proactive and extremely confident, but was not likable in the least. Like there just wasn't anything for me to connect to with the character.
Yeah,
And so I think having that also goes into genre conventions, right? Because in grimdark or in horror, limiting character agency is part of is part of the genre. You
Hmm.
still want to have the characters being proactive and doing things, but the range of possible options is usually restricted when you're talking about those kinds of genres.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes into my next example, who's kind of in the middle of the scale on the agency scale. And that's Vin in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. And I was talking about this
Mm,
with my boyfriend the other night because he just finished reading Mistborn for the first time. And we talked a lot about Vin as a character. And we've decided that A, Brandon Sanderson doesn't know how to write like a good teenage girl. Like, because he has good female characters. Like Navani in Stormlight Archives, amazing. We love her. I won't say she's a bad character, but she's like very reactive, and she has what we called circumstantial agency, where she's very high
hmm
in likability, and she grows in confidence over the length of the series, but she's not very proactive, or rather is only proactive only in response to stimulus. She makes her own decisions, unlike Kendra from Fablehaven, who is mostly
hmm
acted upon her obedient, but Vin, like, something big happens and then she does something about it. She doesn't go out and make things happen.
The comment that you made earlier is that um, is super relevant to Vin's story because her proactivity grows over the course of over the course of the trilogy.
You're right.
Um,
She's much more proactive in book three than she is in book one.
right, and that's part of her character development, especially as you start removing the you start removing the mentors inside of her life. And that can be a super compelling character arc. So it's not that you have to start as a super compelling character, or sorry, that's totally wrong. They do have to be super compelling to start, but they don't necessarily need to be the like epitome and embodiment of proactivity in order to be compelling.
Yes, and that's also where we get dynamic characters, is where they start out maybe not in control and then they gain more control over the story.
Right.
And likewise, you can have the opposite arc depending on the genre, where they start in control and then they lose control over the course of the story. Like that lends itself much more to like a horror thriller narrative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then similar to the Kendra Seth comparison from Fablehaven, Kelsier in Mistborn is way more proactive than Vin. And he's confident, competent. Like Kelsier is pretty high on all three sighting scales. And he's likable both in world and as a character. And that made
hmm
me think of like the reason why I moved into this segment of the episode was because you said you didn't like the main character of the book you read.
hmm
And I wanted to talk about how a character can be likable for us or unlikable for us, but liked in the world. Like, I'm sure there's someone who doesn't like Kelsier. I don't know who that is because he's likable in the world, but like, he's liked both in the world and out of the world. I'm trying to think of an example who's not liked in the world, but who is liked out of the world. Like Snape is not really liked in Harry Potter. There's some really diehard Snape fans, and I'm not one of them. But for our third and final example of agents in stories, we have Viv from Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes, which super cute book. I read this for a book club in like December, and it was one of the best books I read all year.
hmm
She's a go-getter, a queen. She finds who she needs, she hires them. I think she's an icon. Like she's very active. And there are minor characters who are less proactive, like the scholar whose name escapes me. But she's really likable, she's really proactive, and she has like a mix of confidence and competence just because she has such a diverse like skill base. Like, because the book is about like making a coffee shop in the fantasy world. It's
Right.
adorable. And she's really good at like being a barbarian,
Uh-huh.
but she's really bad at like running a business. Like she's okay running a business, but like not as good as she is at being a barbarian. But
Right.
anyways, all that. Um,
Sounds like a prime
that
example of opportunity cost.
I would actually love. We should do a book club series on book club episode on Legends and Lattes, and you can talk about the economics and Legends and Lattes.
Ooh, that sounds really fun. I'll have to pick up a copy just so we could do that.
Yeah, it's really good, and it's only like 200 pages or something. It's less than 300 pages. It's super
Nice.
fast read. We should do that. Zach, how do you give characters more agency? Because we've talked about like characters not having agency versus characters having agency and being somewhere in the middle with like circumstantial agency or reactive agency. But how do you make a character an agent if they're not being an agent?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, I mean, we talked about consequences, and anytime that you can link a consequence from an action into the story, that's going to be good for helping to increase the sense of agency. I think as far as like a technique um for making characters more proactive is reverse outlining. This is kind of a combination of something that I've heard for like organization's sake and also from my days doing high school theater. Um, where when you reverse outlining, you want for each chapter or for each scene, you want to say what each character is doing. So character X is doing Y, character Z is doing A, right? Those sorts of things. Um, and what you will find is that if you are seeing a lot of verbs like react or respond or reply, um, those are all showing that kind of reactive or passive kind of agency level. And so if you can rework that outline so that everybody is doing a strong verb that needs to be, right? There's some scenes where people will be more passive and that's fine, variety is the spice of life and all of that. Um, that can help to increase the agency. So, for example, let's say that you have a scene where um, the butler tells uh, tells the Earl of Shaftesbury, I don't know, um, that his brother is dead. And in your original outline, the Earl of Shaftesbury spends the rest of the chapter reacting to the news. That is not a good verb. That is not a good verb. A better verb is the Earl of Shaftesbury reflects on all that was left unfinished with his relationship with his brother. And then at the end of the chapter, the Earl of Shaftesbury contacts his brother's widow. Like that is an example of how you can flip the script around to make it a little bit more proactive.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that a lot. 'Cause I've used reverse outlining to get a better idea of what's happening in the novel, but I've never used it specifically as a way to like give characters more agency. So I'll definitely be trying that next time I'm stuck in a scene. Also, by the way, if you're stuck in a scene, often it's because someone needs to make a decision. That's something I found
Hmm.
to be true in my writing. And like when I'm reading other people's like writing and like critiquing, I'm like, what's going on in the scene? Why aren't they making decisions? So it can be a way to get unstuck in writing. Another way to get unstuck in writing, like, and this was all over Tumblr posts in like 2015 about writing. It's like kill someone, or they kill a character, or they give someone a gun, or like do something dramatic that has consequences. Because part of agency is consequences. You should write out and about the consequences of someone's actions. Oh, I just tried to poison a king. I don't remember the author's name, but the main character starts out as less of an agent, but then because of the consequences of one action she does at her mother's behest, um, she like suddenly has to make all these choices and like live her own life. So consequences can be important stimuli as well as a driving force in this story, not just for characters making new decisions, but for characters just like existing and being compelling and having like trials. Today on Quid Pros Quo, we talked about agency, which is a tendency to take action, especially informed action, to get a desired result. Agents are generally more interesting than objects, and when your characters make decisions, it aids immersion and produces a tighter pacing for your narrative. We talked about a sliding scale of character aspects, likability, proactivity, and confidence, and then looked at different agents in different books and like where they fall on a spectrum of agency. Then we talked a little bit about how to give characters more agency. Um, and the importance of consequences. If you have a favorite character who is an agent, or a favorite character who is not an agent who is still compelling, you should let us know. Email us at quidprosequo@gmail.com. That's all we have for you guys today. I'm Rin,
And I'm Zach.
and this has been Quid Pros Quo. Thank you so much.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and CK Jensen. If you like this episode, be sure to leave us a rating. And if you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. For more episodes, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts.